Well, hello there, and again, welcome to another session here on the web of Bible studies or perhaps a sermon series that we're going through. We hope that you're finding the material edifying and helpful in your walk and growth in knowledge and grace of Jesus Christ, because that certainly is our intent. We wanted to take, though, before we get started, this moment just to remind all of you that if indeed you'd like to make a comment or ask a question, feel free to go ahead and email us at billw@cgi.org. That's billw@cgi.org. Feel free to write at any time through the course of the presentations, because we want to know what you're thinking, and if indeed we're missing something that you'd like us to address, to draw our attention to it. So don't forget, ask some questions or make some comments and help us out with some feedback. We certainly do appreciate that as well. And again, that address is billw@cgi.org. And go ahead and feel free to do it at any time. So right now, without any further delay, let's get back to the sessions that we're studying this week.
All right, well, with that, I wanted to launch back into this last, what I believe to be, will be the last segment of our exploration of the questions regarding the mark of the beast. It is a six-part series. This is part 6, by the way. Those of you who have missed the others, we will be releasing them here shortly in a weekly follow-up Bible study to the book of Daniel when we get through Daniel. So we'll be going back and allowing all that to be public as far as these particular series of presentations. But again, I wanted to, before I get started, mention this one more time, just so that we all understand where we're going with this topic, because oftentimes topics like this, especially 6 hours of it over a period of months now, in this case about a month and a half, at least for as far as my presentations are concerned, that again I want to just mention to all of us that these are not, that is, the information being presented is not for the purpose of scaring us. It's not for the purpose of giving us any kind of sense of futility. What it is, it's dedicated and intended to be informative. And certainly in the day and age that we're living in with regards to the development of technologies and what have you, I would hope, as it was for me in researching this and going down these rabbit holes, that it was quite interesting from the standpoint of the fact that in some cases I didn't realize the technology had been developed that way. And or even in some cases that there were real living human beings with these kind of wild ideas, if you know what I'm saying, of where they're taking us in these technological venues of consideration on what these things can do. And you know what I'm talking about. We've covered pretty much let me emphasize, just 4 categories of technology, which really wasn't all that much. I mean, I could spend probably another 6 weeks going through more, but there's a lot more in the Bible to talk about than that. So we want to not necessarily go into those areas, but as you know, we've covered roughly about 4 last week. We covered, not last week, but 2 weeks ago, we covered those latter 2 areas, artificial intelligence and nanotechnology, and of which I would hope, as far as nanotechnology is concerned, I know it was surprising to me. I think maybe perhaps for some of you there on the internet as well, that it was surprising to all of us on these little robotic devices. I mean, who would have ever thought of this stuff, that this is already being developed, explored, designed, engineered for purposes of who knows what, as we discussed in terms of the potentialities of these little things that are in some cases smaller than 100 nanometers, which is smaller than a virus, and of which indicates mathematically, physiologically, could actually be inserted into a virus, and certainly into a bacteria, because a bacteria is bigger than a virus. So, I mean, these are little machines, little robots. And then we talked about smart dust. You know, who would have ever thought smart dust? What is that? And we talked a little bit about the dispensation, or the dispensing, I should say, the dispensing of these items and how they are being dispensed or considered on being dispensed. Genetic modified organisms, GMOs as we know it, in foods. vaccines, chemtrails, and other types of means by which they're going to continue to explore in ways of how they can dispense these devices. So this is real stuff. And I don't mention it at all in terms of scaring us, but to inform us. And I want to emphasize that because I don't want us to get feudalistic about it because, again, God is still on his throne. And we can't stop what's coming. It's coming. At some point, the script is written, and mankind, in his nature, in the way things are, in the way we think as a creation of human beings, we tend to gravitate toward these certain trends, these certain habits. And our history, human history, has proven this by the legacy of which we've generated over the millennia. We've been here about 6,000 years or so, brethren. And our history is fight, fight, fight. That word, I can't. If any of you watched the proceedings this week, you'll know what I'm talking about. That word fight, fight, fight was really emphasized during that whole thing. But nevertheless, a slip of the tongue. But be that as it may, mankind has been doing that throughout their whole existence, fighting and fighting, empires rising and falling. You've got something I want, so I'm going to beat you up for it, because I want it. You shouldn't have it. You don't deserve to have it. I deserve to have it. So I'm going to take it from you. And that's been our history. James talked about why are there wars among you? And it's really about lust. It's really about, wanting things that are not ours, but in fact we want them. We feel we deserve them more than you, so consequently I'm justified, in invading your land or your space on this planet. And so we saw a lot of this in history, and I think in this regard, and getting back to this, I say these things only to inform us so that we are aware of these things and are not surprised, and so in a preparation fashion in our minds, in our hearts, our emotions, physically as well, and spiritually, most importantly, we can prepare ourselves to make decisions on how we're going to deal with these things as they come up on the surface, as they emerge into our world, as they come into our reality, and we have to contend with them because of certain laws, certain restrictions, however they're managed, in whatever way, shape, or form. And they are managed in some ways because you know as well as I do, there are guises that hide agendas so that you can be talked into in getting it. Oh, this is going to be great for your muscles. It's going to be great for your suppressing your appetite. Why, you'll stay healthy. Pandemics will not have any kind of rule over you or any kind of infectious impact or effect on you. Why, you might even be sexually enhanced, And we get all of these sales lines that, well, you should take this pill, or you should have this inoculation or that inoculation. And there's a lot of that going on. And we as consumers, especially here in the West, got to consider these things. And we make decisions predicated, don't we, on a lot of that, whether it's buying this pop or that bread or this vegetable or buy that car or spend time doing this. All these things have impact on our lives. And my point being is that as I introduced to you this gentleman named Klaus Schwab, got to make sure I say that right, Klaus Schwab, he is thinking really out there. And this guy's alive. And he's healthy. He's going to be around for a while. And he's got a lot of authority. He's got a lot of respect. He's got a lot of gravitas. He's got a lot of currency among movers and shakers in this world now. Not in a decade. Now. He's the director. He's the originator and the founder of this World Forum. And as a result, this WEF, I think it's called, and as a result, has great influence on the minds of these individuals that want a global community of nations. And all I'm saying is, again, I don't say this to scare you, I say this to inform you, because very simply, the fact of it is, we are moving into these areas of technological development and terminologies like technocracy and things and products that develop into new ideas and concepts like cyborgs, androids, things we saw in movies 10, 20 years ago, like I mentioned to you with regards to the Stepford Wives or Westworld or the Matrix, all these things, and I referenced even to many of you that you remember about me when I was a kid in the 50s, Buck Rogers and the wireless telephone that I got it over there, but at any rate, I displayed it to show how that was sci-fi back in the 50s. Nobody in their wildest dreams could ever think of a telephone. Why, in the 1950s, if you recall, if you've ever seen any pictures for you young folks, but for those of us who have a little gray hair or no hair, you remember the phones where you pick it up and you dial? And in some cases, you shared a line. They called it a party line. And you had to wait your turn to get on the phone. If you picked the phone up, somebody would be talking to you. And then you'd have to wait. Remember those days? Then you go back. And you never sometimes knew who that party line person was that you were sharing the phone with. And then finally you'd say, get off the phone already. I got to make a phone call. You know? But those were the days. Today, as I said, the phone today we have was sci-fi back then. Cyborgs, androids, humanoids, technocratic plasma. I mean, all of this stuff is so wild, and yet today, brethren, we've got corporations and companies like Elon Musk's private little separate company and Google's little separate company doing research with invested budgets, not in the thousands, as I mentioned, but in the millions, that are investigating the development of these technologies. Even Jimmy Fallon interviewed one of these, I guess what you could say, androids, which was a robotic individual, female, had kind of like a skin, and actually interviewed her. He did. And she talked back to him and responded. Artificial intelligence, and even mocked him. Told him, as I mentioned, that she could be a better host than him. So we are in a brave new world. And, if Klaus Schwab has his way of thinking, we'll all be traveling faster than a speeding bullet and leaping tall buildings. Because these enhancements, especially with regards to the cyborg idea of inserting little machines into human beings to make them super, like the $6 million man, or individuals that, can have an eye, a mechanical eye that can see and things of this sort. These are things, in some cases, without a doubt, can be good. But I'm sorry, I just cannot be that naive not to think that it's somewhere along the lines it's going to go south, as it often does. And just like any surgeon, it can be good and or it can be bad. President Eisenhower, as mentioned, and we all know this, he did warn us in his parting words regarding the industrial military complex, and that we cannot be naive about this military industrial complex and its dedication to surveillance, manipulation, and its intent to control. That's what it's really all about. So we see these things developing. We see different industries involved in it, whether it be political policies that gravitate toward globalism, whether it's big pharma, or whether it's high tech, big tech, or it's the manipulation of the minds of you and I and our perceptions of reality by the mainstream media and the narratives they weave, and of which the control now of going in the way that it's been going in terms of freedom of speech, so that those counterintuitive perspectives that may contradict the narrative of the mainstream media are suppressed, are shut down. These are the realities that we today do indeed live in by virtue of the things that we're subjected to. And people like Klaus Schwab and even Pope Francis are now today involved in pushing this one world government, this international community of nations, this Agenda 21, and as they try to shift into this new terminology called the Great Reset, which I will have some things to talk about in the Missing in Action News after services today, a tremendous article that I wanted to, informative I should say, article on that particular subject. But let me say this, brethren, as we launch into this last session. The globalists have been watching for a long time. They have been pushing an agenda for a long time. We have been, in God's church, led to understand that there would be, in the end time, the emergence of what we considered and recognized as, and certainly rightly so, the resurrection of a Babylonian, Greco-Macedonian, Roman type of government, of which its disease, its off-the-grid destruction, hiding, will be brought back into light, and according to Revelation 13, the wound was healed. And it comes back on to become a very dominant force, of which so many of us are well aware and understand does indeed become an effective, impacting force on planet Earth. Daniel chapter 2, I just want to bring our attention to this script because this is all part of the direction we're going in, and of which a lot of what we've been talking about through the 5 previous sessions of this, considering the beast's mark, is heading to, and what will give it the legs it needs to be enforced upon, to be what you could say imposed upon the population of the world. And it says right here in that first vision that Nebuchadnezzar had of the image of the head of gold and so on, regarding the fourth beast, and I'm going to break into the context. We're in the fourth portion of this statue. Actually, it's not a beast, it's a statue. And it says, in the days of these kings, and the days of these kings are the 10 toes that are mixed with clay and iron. And if you read the previous verses, I'm not going to do it for the sake of time, but I will reference it, that you will see that the context illustrates that in the days of these 10 kings, and if you go over to Revelation chapter 17 and knit that together, you will see that we're talking about the same thing. John 500 to 600 years later, substantiates and confirms the vision of which Nebuchadnezzar had back in roughly about 600 BC. John, in about late in his life, toward the end of the first century, around 95, 93 AD, has the same vision corroborating what Nebuchadnezzar sees and what Daniel interpreted for him. And in verse 44, it says, in the days of these kings, these 10 kings, shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. The good guys win. I always like to say that. The good guys win. We ultimately do win this war. But nevertheless, he goes on, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces, consume all kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. For as much as you saw that the stone, which represents Christ, was cut out of the mountain without hands, it was supernatural, it came from another dimension, it came out of the blue, and it takes down this beast, this imposition on mankind, described there in Revelation 18. If you wanted to chain reference your Bible, you can read the demise of the beast and the takedown of that world-ruling government. But at any rate, it was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it broke in pieces the iron, the brass, the clay, the silver, and the gold, which goes through all the materials of this statue that Nebuchadnezzar dreamed of. The great God has made known to the king, and Daniel's telling him, the great God, the living God, the God of Israel, the God of mankind, the one who created and breathed air into Adam and created Eve out of his rib. That God, Daniel says to King Nebuchadnezzar, he has made known to the king what shall come to pass hereafter. And the dream is certain. By the word of God, brethren, this dream, this vision is predetermined and certain. Whoa. And the interpretation thereof, sure. Period. Some years later, Daniel, not Nebuchadnezzar, Daniel has a vision. And in chapter 7, a corroborating vision of what Nebuchadnezzar had that now is corroborated by John again, because in Revelation, John connects up with these beasts in Revelation 13. He connects up with Daniel 2, John does, with the statue, and then he connects up with Daniel 7 in Revelation 13. Revelation 17, 13 connect up with Daniel 7 and Daniel 2. Amazing. 600 to 700 years apart. How does that happen? Because God is God, brethren. God is God, and He is steering the world according to His plan. And praise God for that. We're in the best hands that we could ever be in, brethren. Regardless of how tough things may get, keep in mind, for the people of God, it does indeed work out. It does indeed work out for the people of God. And we do, in the end, as this all comes to fruition, as we're told here and assured, the good guys do indeed win. And you know what? We're the good guys. We're the good guys. And that's important to recognize, brethren, and never forget that, so that we understand that these prophecies, as pointed out here in Daniel, and let me break again into the context of Daniel 7 here in verse 19, talking about the fourth beast, the one that would be up and on the earth, controlling, impacting, and affecting people on the planet. Verse 19, at that time, in the end times, it says, "Then I would know the truth of the fourth beast, which was diverse." This is verse 19, Daniel chapter 7. "That from all others exceeding dreadful, whose teeth were of iron and nails of brass, and devoured and broken pieces and stamped the residue with his feet. And of the 10 horns that were on his head, and of the other which came up, and before whom 3 fell, even if that horn that had eyes and a mouth that spoke very great things, which was more stout than his fellows, I beheld, and the same horn made war with the saints and prevailed against them." Beat us up at this time. Later on, what goes around comes around, for sure. But at this time, in the playing out of the events, the beast has its way with those that are following the true God. Why do you think that is? Brethren, it's because we resist. We resist the encroachment. We resist the mandates. We resist and fess up to, as Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego did, the consequences. And even if we get thrown into the fire, metaphorically speaking, we have the courage to stand strong with each other and take the consequences for what they're worth, rather than submit, rather than concede, rather than give up and surrender to a system that we know is evil. That's important at this time, that we recognize that. And as I said, as we go forward in many of these cases, it's important that we recognize along the way, There will be events and circumstances, conditions, manipulations, information, all kinds of things to mess with our heads in some respects if we're not grounded. If we're not grounded, to get us, I used this word before, I'm coming back to it because I'm going to end with it today. I want you to get this into your heart of hearts. To get us to be conditioned. Conditioned. It's important to recognize that, brethren. Conditioning is a slow, incremental process of development and conditioning, or that's how conditioning comes to be. If you're going to train for a marathon, you just don't go out there and run 25 miles. It just doesn't work that way. You got to take some time. You got to build up that resistance. You got to learn how to breathe. You got to learn how to pace. You got to get those muscles geared to the point where not only are you able to handle the endurance of the length of the distance, but also the speed. Brethren, we are, in many respects, being conditioned. Guys like Klaus Schwab are indeed open now. They are emboldened. Why? Because they have support from around the world to give Klaus Schwab the, what you could say, gravitas, the unabashed, unapologetic statements such as this, and I quote, "This pandemic represents a rare but narrow window of opportunity to reflect, to reimagine, and to reset our world," unquote. They will use everything and anything. Now, I know I'm going to get this. Are you saying that there is no CCP virus? No, I'm not. There is a CCP virus. People are sadly dying from it. Some of us have been sick from it, even in my own family. We have good reason to believe that even one of my daughters had it as early as last December of 2019, before we even knew what it was. Why do I say that? Because of the symptoms: loss of taste and smell and so forth and so on, fever and what have you. Point being, though, brethren, yes, it is, but that doesn't mean that a crisis like this will not be exploited by people who have intentions and nefarious agendas to be worked, and will do everything they can to do things to us, to get us to begin to get conditioned. I don't have to tell you. You know exactly what has happened here. And the fact remains that a lot of people have lost their jobs. Whole economies have been shut down. In a matter of months, you and I and the rest of the world, I don't care if you're in Italy or Spain, it doesn't matter if you're in France or Japan, Tokyo, doesn't matter whether or not you're in India, Australia, we're all in our homes. And in some cases, still locked down with a curfew, which, by the way, I'm thankful. I understand that Ohio has lifted the curfew, and now we can go and have an adult beverage after 10 o'clock in the evening. At a bar, if we want to do that, you know. But again, my point, and it doesn't take away from the sobering reality that we're in, that the world literally got shut down by an unseen bug, an invisible bug. We call it a virus, a SARS-2, COVID-2. People call it COVID-19. And as a result, people watched And those people that I'm talking about that are watching and strategizing, looking at and evaluating are considered globalists. Those are the ones that I'm talking about. And they are taking precarious, very quick, and prodigious amounts of notes. Studying. What did it take? And in the name of security, we've seen it before, the name of security, accuracy, whether it be recovery, tracking, healing, auditing, or convenience, all of these are the guises. These are the guises that we buy into. You got to go through an x-ray machine now if you want to get on an airplane because we have terrorists. You got to give that freedom up. Got to give that freedom up because we got people out there putting bombs on airplanes. I get that. I'm not saying it's wrong or right. I'm just saying and observing the reality that's happened, that guess what? We've given up some of our freedoms. As I mentioned and characterized before, back in the 70s and 80s, when I used to fly around the water treatment business and, going to Texas, California, wherever I was going for this, that, or the other thing, I could get to an airport an hour before the plane, run through, as I mentioned before, the O.J. Simpson thing, and slide up to the podium there, give her my ticket, and get on the plane 15 minutes before it takes off. I had no problem. Now you got to get there 2 hours before, stand in line, hurry up and wait, kind of a thing, like the military. And, you got 50 people in front of you, and you got dogs sniffing your bags and your legs while you're standing in line. Conditioning. Benjamin Franklin said, those who would give up essential liberties to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety, unquote. Benjamin Franklin. Thomas Jefferson said, timid men prefer the calm of despotism to the boisterous seas of liberty. We mentioned that. I'm not going to belabor it. But to maintain liberty and freedom, brethren, is not easy. It takes all of us to be cooperative with one another to do what we can to preserve those liberties and freedoms. And that's why one of our forefathers, I think it was John Adams, if I recall correctly, said that's why our system is built for a religious people. Because without it, this government cannot work correctly. And he was speaking from the framing of the basis of this book being the foundation of our behaviors, you see. If we all lived by the book, then I could lead my kids with any one of you in this room, which I hope I could anyway, being that we're Christians. But today, you got to be careful about who you trust, is my point. And why is that? Because everybody's dancing to a different tune. And if you don't think so, you're naive. We need to be as wise as serpents, harmless as doves, and be questioning types of people as we qualify and vet the things we entertain into our lives, the things that we embrace, the things that we believe, the things that are indeed all the things that mean so much to us. I've read this before. I'm going to read it again. Martin Luther King. He, quote, who passively accepts evil is as much involved in it as he who helps to perpetuate it. He who accepts evil without protesting against it is really cooperating with it. Martin Luther King, unquote, is what he said so many years ago. And so, unfortunately, we see it all the time that, sadly, good people stand down, and the next thing you know, you got a strip club in your neighborhood. No, this is real stuff. It's what happens. Good people stand down. You tell me, what else can go out the window? Good people have a voice, but they don't raise it, so they recoil back into the shadows and become the silent majority. And in the meantime, the world goes further south. Because nobody said, stop! It's not right anymore. It's not right anymore. We got to put a stop to these kinds of things. But sadly, that kind of speech is now fast being shut down. The last couple of weeks, we have seen a horrific amount of effort on behalf of Facebook, on behalf of Twitter, Instagram, deleting accounts that are voices of a different type of narrative that doesn't agree with theirs. As a matter of fact, we even had YouTube recategorize the Church of God International into a political organization. Jeff Reed, and kudos to Jeff, was able to get them to stand down and was able to talk with somebody there, and as a result, got our categorization rearranged. May have been Facebook. I think it was YouTube, though, but rearranged to where now we're still considered a church. But you see how speech, this is a religious discussion. This is a church. Yes, we talk about real issues and policies. But brethren, we're not into politics in the sense of promoting parties, promoting candidates, telling you who to vote for, even if you do vote, or mandating the fact that you should vote when you don't vote. We're not into any of that. That's politics. But we are into being aware, heads up, on policies. Policy. And that's important for us to recognize so that we can identify if indeed we're going in a different direction, that we're aware. And if indeed we are plugged in to certain things, that we know which things to get involved with, or which things to support, or which things to criticize, or ridicule, or protest. I mean, is it wrong for a Christian to protest peacefully? Peacefully. About something that might be coming to their neighborhood that they don't like, that's the antithesis to a Christian reality, to a Christian standard, to a Christian ethic? For you to go down and put your hat in the ring with individuals and become the activist and protect and help? No, there's nothing wrong with that. If you feel passionate about it and it's in line with Christian belief, it's in line with Christian ethic. Is it wrong for you to go protest abortion in a right to life parade? I would hope you would think, no, not. And certainly if you're passionate about it, why not throw your hat in that ring? And pick a lane. Pick a lane. Pick a side. Because, brethren, if you haven't got anything about what we're talking about, what we're talking about, this mark that we're exploring, this whole thing is coming down ultimately, if you're alive, and it comes down to this point of this script where this mark is actually engaged, guess what? You're going to have to pick. That's what it's coming down to. You're going to have to pick a lane. You're going to have to pick a side. You're going to have to say either, okay, I'll do it, or absolutely not. Absolutely not. Do what you will. Do what you will. 2001, 9/11 hit. And the incremental devolving, derailing, untangling, loosening, and disappearing of certain rights began in an intense fashion. As I said before, the steps of incrementalism is the method by which the designers condition us to accept new realities. 2001 was a catalyst. 7 years later, almost to the day, 7 years later, the number of perfection, almost to the day, 2008 in the fall, the economy completely broke down. When did 9/11 happen? In the fall of 2001, September 11th. 7 years later, the economy completely unraveled in the United States of America. So much so to the point that in retrospect we found out through the Federal Reserve that America was about to go under. That the bankruptcy that we are in, we are a bankrupt company, caught up with us. And if it wasn't for, as George Bush said, you gotta break the rules of capitalism sometimes in order to fix capitalism, unquote, so to speak, paraphrased. And he signed off on the first, what we came to know as a quantitative easement, a QE they called them, a QE. And they went ahead, pressed the button to afford more money to go into the system. You can't say print money anymore, it's just digital now. They just open up the budget and you got more money available. We raised the lid, so to speak. We could spend more money. We can spend more money. And what did the government do? They went ahead and bought General Motors. Remember, they didn't buy it, but they certainly buoyed it. They buoyed it, gave it all kinds of money. Turns out, though, in the long run, they did pay it. General Motors did pay it back, but it got to the point there in the beginning there that everybody was kiddingly calling General Motors government motors because the government bailed them out. In the truth of capitalism, guess what? Those that are over-leveraged in things like this, they go by the wayside, and other guys that are a little bit more healthy and weren't as leveraged buy up the pieces and start something new. That's how capitalism works. The government doesn't get involved, bail them out. If I overspent in my company, and I ultimately overextended myself with debt, and my debt-to-equity ratio was overextended, and my company went down, or I was at the risk of going down, guess what? In my business, it's the way it works, my company would get picked up by U.S. Filter or some other big fish, and they'd pick up my pieces, and I would be absorbed into their company. That's just the way it works. It's just the way it works. The government doesn't bail me out in that respect. But 2008 came and the collapse and all of that. Jobs went offshore. We were basically witnessing unemployment going very high. And we were told that the gross national product would never exceed 1 to 1.5% ever again. And the United States was loaded with restrictions and reduction of drilling. Remember the drill? Remember the words back then? Got to drill, baby, drill. And why was that? Because of the restrictions preventing the drilling of oil and the suppression of the United States' power and richness of resources, wealth, and prosperity that was laying there but could not be touched because of certain ones in power due to policies they had. Look it up on who was president then, 2008 to 2016, and see the globalist agenda that they were working to allow the United States to be eaten up, to be absorbed, to be basically fall in line. And then, out of the blue, surprisingly, like a rocket ship all of a sudden, a sucker punch shot in 2016, a nationalist movement erupts like a volcano. And the next thing we know, here we are, fast forward to 2020, and the United States of America is the biggest and the largest producer of oil. We are on the way of becoming the world's biggest exporter of liquid gas. We are now energy independent. Immigration illegals had fallen to a trickle. Things all of a sudden were like whiplash, like, wait a minute, that's not what we were told would happen. Jobs came back. Taxes were lowered. I don't know about you, but I know some people's 401ks are up over 20%. Right now, today still. 4 years, all of a sudden, like, wow, somebody turned a light on and said, holy smokes, those are red. I didn't realize they were red. And we woke up, didn't we? We woke up. And now, all of a sudden, the conditioning of a 1.5% GDP became like a lightning rod. And here, the United States, over the last previous years, have been 2.5% to 3%. Jobs are coming back. Apple invested literally billions of dollars into the United States. Companies are spending money in building factories. Tremendous change in just 4 years. I don't want to get into the debates and the weeds of now what has happened over this last year in 2020. But I will say this, again, out of the blue, all of a sudden, like a rocket, a sucker punch. The world, not just the United States, but the world is hit with what we call this pandemic. A virus that is certainly highly suspect came out of China, in particular a Wuhan lab over there, and ruined the economies of the world, and ruined, of course, the economy of the United States of America. And now the results of months of this and the constant science and the conflicts behind the science, the controversies that are still being, what you could say, debated, and the conversation that is contradictory from one point of view to another, nevertheless has caused certain manifestations for all of us. For all of us. Case in point, I already mentioned. You have the idea of what do you call it? My mind has just stopped. The situation of curfews. That's what I was looking for. Curfews, where at 10 o'clock you got to be in the house. The fact that you can't go into a restaurant unless you wear a mask. But yet you can, when you get to the table, take it off. You know, people that are outside and in the wind, out on a beach in the heat, are still, in some cases like California, forced to wear masks. And on it goes, brethren, to the point now where the big issue is, and I'm not going to go into the controversies surrounding this, but I am going to mention the fact of the, what you could say, incremental movement toward the encouragement of getting vaccines. I'm not saying right or wrong. I'm just saying these things are manifesting for all of us to observe and see. And at some point, brethren, you got to make a decision. You got to get in a lane. You got to decide on what side you're going to be on, because these are things that are now happening. And as far as Klaus Schwab is concerned, are in some cases not going to go back to the way they were. As a matter of fact, his idea of reset, and we'll get into that here afterwards in the Missing in Action News, his idea of reset is not resetting back to the way it was. It's resetting to the definition of a whole new reality, a whole new reality, a whole new normal, as they would say in some cases. And so we have these things, and we're seeing manifested harassments as a result of choices of certain ones of us who perhaps in some cases, and I've heard everything from people getting accosted or standing off face to face with somebody in the aisle at Costco because they weren't wearing a mask, or they were wearing the mask under their nose, or at a gas station while they're pumping their gas and somebody says, hey, put your mask on, because people are emboldened like that. I just saw a woman in a grocery store on the internet who didn't wear a mask, and she took a swipe at the worker who said she had to put the mask on because she was in the grocery store, and the grocery store's policy was if you don't wear a mask, you can't come in and shop. I was 2 weeks ago, before we had the snow and the cold weather, running out at the park in Metro Parks where the deer is and so forth. I was out there running, doing my thing, and here comes this little old man. I say old, he's probably my age, but nevertheless, here he comes, and he's coming the opposite way, and I'm going the other way, and I'm not wearing a mask. I don't wear a mask when I run, and I'm outside, and I'm just running, I'm doing my jogging and so forth, and here he comes. He's got a mask on, he's got a sweatsuit on. I mean, he's all covered up, and he's coming, and he's doing his little trotting. He sees me coming on him. He goes out on the street. I'm like this. Wondering what in the world? I mean, I brushed my teeth, you know. But these are the things that, I mean, it's almost like insane. It's almost like, where is the reality taking us in this case? Because never in your wildest dreams would you have thought that you would see these kinds of things, brethren, these kinds of things. And again, the logic, the contradictions, you know, that we've heard along the way of, you know, strip joints being allowed to remain open while churches are forced to close. Different convoluted rationales and reasonings of how you can meet. You're only allowed to have 10 people or less. Canada is very, very restricted still, and some states here in the United States is still very restricted in many, many areas. And so we see again, and I come back to this word, conditioning, 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 and consequently the things that are mentioned in Revelation in this subject is all about whether or not you're going to accept these things that are indeed coming down. Case in point, the people here in Revelation 13. Revelation 13. Proskuneo. Proskuneo says again, and they worship proskuneo. The dragon gave power unto the beast. They worshiped the beast, saying, who's like unto the beast? This is verse 4 of Revelation 13. Who's able to make war with this beast? Over here again in verse 12, same chapter, Revelation 13, verse 12. He exercises all the power of the first beast, talking about another beast that is introduced to us in verse 11, and says this, the first beast before him, and causes the earth and them which dwell therein to proskuneo, to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. People are actually going to essentially engage in state worship and are going to adopt this mark, verse 16, same chapter, Revelation 13. We've read this before. Let me bring us full circle. He causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive this charagma, this etch, this mark, this whatever it may be, scar, cut, whatever. That's what the word charagma means. Will it be something along those lines? I don't know. I don't know. Do I believe that Sunday keeping and observance will be part of it? Yes, I do. Because Daniel 7 says he will change laws, times, forcing the people, the populace, to abide by certain rules and standards. And we know that the Catholic Church is heavily involved in the globalist trends and movement toward these acceptance and embracements of globalism, especially this latest Pope Francis. So we see these movements, we see these gravitations toward these things, and consequently, we see the potentiality of certain mandates that are obviously being indicative here, because it says it causes, it mandates, that's that Hebrew word, remember, commits, it requires all, both small and great. If you don't have this mark on your passport, and I'm not saying nothing out of step here, they're already talking about the fact that if you don't get vaccinated and have a proof on your passport that you've been vaccinated, you can't go anywhere flying or out of the country. Denmark has already said if you're not vaccinated, you can't come in. Denmark. So I guess I'm not going to Denmark anytime soon at this point. But Denmark claims that they are indeed not accepting anybody that has not been vaccinated. And so these are things, brethren, that again, conditioning. I'm not saying the vaccine is the mark of the beast. Don't misinterpret me. Don't write me and say I said that. No, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that. I'm saying this is about conditioning. This is all about conditioning. And brethren, it's so very important that you really begin to think things through on how much conditioning you're willing to tolerate so that you don't get fooled and allow that toleration to lead to compromise. Now, some of you, time's running out on me, some of you have written to me, well, Bill, what do you think you can get it unbeknownst to yourself? That you could secretly be injected with something or be able to go ahead and get the mark and not know it? No, you're not going to lose your salvation by accident, brethren. Turn with me over here to Revelation 20. I want to show you something real quick. Something to consider. Revelation 20, this is after Christ comes back. 1,000 years is going to get set up. Satan, the devil, is bound for 1,000 years, verse 2. And in verse 4, we drop down for the sake of time. I saw thrones, and they that sat upon them. Judgment was given unto them. And I saw souls of them that were beheaded for the witness of the Jesus and for the word of God, and which had no worship, which had not worshipped the beast, neither his image, neither had received his mark upon their foreheads or their hands, and they lived and reigned with Christ 1,000 years. These people consciously resisted. They did not receive, they did not worship. I choose not to worship the beast. I choose not to get the mark. There's an indication here, implication, very clear implication, that these people at that time had the right to recognize and consciously make a decision on yea or nay as to whether or not they were going to go ahead and participate in the civic duties that the mark draws on them. Back to Revelation 6, the fifth seal. Let me take you to the fifth seal, which we understand to be Christian martyrdom. And again, here in verse 9, we break into the context. And when he had opened the fifth seal, and this is right after the four horsemen of the apocalypse, just to give you a little context. I saw under the altar the souls of them. This is very poetic and very, what you could say, metaphoric, but nevertheless, it gets a point across. Metaphors being used here to illustrate a spiritual reality. And it says here, of them that were slain for the word of God and for the testimony which they held. And they cried with a loud voice, saying, How long, O Lord, holy and true, do you not judge and avenge our blood on them that dwell on the earth? Verse 11, and white robes were given unto them, every one of them, and it was said unto them that they should rest yet a little season until their fellow servants also, their brethren, that should be killed as they were, should be fulfilled. How were the martyrs of old killed? They're a martyr. What does that mean? They made a choice. They picked a lane, and it didn't agree with the king. And guess what? They lost their head. They got burned at the stake. How did those Christians of old, what does history tell us? Why were they martyred? They're martyrs. The very word martyr means they were murdered for what they stood for. They went against and resisted the powers to be and took a stand and said, no, have your way. Brethren, in every case, you will not be snookered into getting this mark. You will have an opportunity to choose. God is watching. He's watching all of us. How we are dealing with the conditioning going on around us. Think deeply. Think this through. God wants courageous Christians, and He wants us to be thinking Christians. Don't be lukewarm. Choose either cold or hot, but choose. God is watching. He really is watching all of us. And how we choose, how we tolerate, how we allow ourselves to be conditioned is truly very, very important. So, really, let me leave you with a question on all of this, because this is really what it boils down to, and that is the conditioning, brethren. The conditioning has begun. It has begun. We're in the midst now, since 2001, we have been confronted with and contending with many, many means of conditioning. And we've been responding one way or the other to get along in the ways that we can. So the real question is for all of us to ask ourselves, how are we doing in the conditioning that we're involved with? And how far will we allow ourselves to be conditioned?